Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Frank Delacroix stood at attention in his dress uniform one last time, watching the flag fold with military precision. 25 years in Army intelligence, followed by 15 years in private security consulting. 40 years of service to country and family. And now, they were handing him a gold watch and a pension. The retirement ceremony took place in the base's oak-paneled hall, filled with colleagues, subordinates, and what he'd thought was his loving family. Rita, his wife of 22 years, sat in the front row wearing the diamond necklace he'd bought her for their anniversary. Their son Trevor, 21 and fresh out of college, checked his phone constantly. Their daughter Madison, 19, seemed more interested in her Instagram than her father's final military moment. Frank had built everything for them. The sprawling house in the suburbs, private school educations, Rita's wellness center that she'd opened 3 years ago. He'd sacrificed deployments, missed birthdays, endured the loneliness of military life, all so they could live comfortably. But Frank Delacroix hadn't survived psychological operations in 3 different theaters by being naive. For the past 6 months, he'd known exactly what Rita was doing. The discovery had been accidental. A text message that popped up on her iPad while she was in the shower, left carelessly on their kitchen counter. Can't wait to be free of the old soldier. Tonight was amazing. B. Boyd Hutchins, Rita's yoga instructor turned business partner. 12 years younger than Frank, all smooth charm and calculated manipulation. Frank had conducted surveillance operations on enemy combatants with less thoroughness than he'd applied to uncovering his wife's affair. He'd installed software on her devices, placed GPS trackers, even rented apartments across from Boyd's loft to photograph their encounters. Rita thought she was clever, but she was an amateur playing against a professional who'd spent decades in intelligence gathering. The affair had been going on for 8 months, but the real betrayal went deeper. Through financial records and intercepted communications, Frank had discovered Rita and Boyd's ultimate plan: divorce him immediately after retirement, take half his assets, and use his pension to fund their new life together. They'd even involved the children. Trevor had been promised Frank's vintage car collection if he supported the divorce. Madison had been told she could redecorate the house however she wanted once Frank was gone. As the ceremony concluded and people began mingling, Frank felt a familiar calm settle over him. It was the same feeling he'd experienced before every major operation in his military career. Everything was about to change, but he was ready. Rita approached with that smile he'd once found beautiful, now seeing it for what it was, a weapon. "Honey, we need to talk privately," she said, gesturing toward a side room. Frank nodded. "Of course." Chapter 2, The Betrayal. The side room was small and windowless, typically used for private briefings. Rita had chosen it well, isolated, soundproof. Trevor and Madison followed them in, both wearing expressions Frank had never seen before. Cold, calculating, strangers wearing his children's faces. "Frank," Rita began, her voice taking on a tone he'd never heard. Confident, almost predatory. "We need to discuss your retirement plans." She reached into her purse and withdrew a thick manila envelope. "These are divorce papers. I'm filing immediately." "And these," she produced another envelope, "are foreclosure documents on the house." Frank remained perfectly still, his expression neutral. Years of interrogation training had taught him to reveal nothing. "The house is underwater on the mortgage," Rita continued, her voice gaining strength. "My business partner Boyd has found some irregularities in your finances. Tax liens, unpaid debts you've been hiding from me. The house has to go." Trevor laughed, a sound that cut through Frank like shrapnel. "Should have seen this coming, old man. Mom's been planning this for months. You think we didn't know about your secret bank accounts? Your gambling debts?" Frank's eyes narrowed slightly. Gambling debts? There were no gambling debts. But he said nothing. Madison chimed in with vicious satisfaction. 40 years for nothing. Boyd showed us everything. You've been lying to us our whole lives about money." Rita leaned forward, Her mask completely dropped now. "We're taking the house, and you get nothing. Boyd and I are starting fresh, and the kids support us completely. You can keep your precious military pension. It's barely enough to rent an apartment anyway." She slid the papers across the small table. "Sign them. Make this easy on everyone." Frank looked down at the documents. The divorce papers were standard, but the foreclosure documents were interesting. According to these papers, the house had been refinanced multiple times, with loans taken out in his name that he'd never authorized. Debts to companies he'd never heard of. Financial obligations that painted him as either a compulsive gambler or a man living far beyond his means. This wasn't just adultery and greed. This was fraud. Rita and Boyd had forged his signature on loan documents, created false financial records, and built a case to make him look financially irresponsible. They weren't just stealing his life, they were destroying his reputation. Frank picked up the pen Rita offered. "Okay," he said simply. The words seemed to deflate some of Rita's anticipated drama. She'd clearly expected begging, anger, threats. Instead, Frank began signing documents with the same methodical precision he'd once used to sign operation orders. "That's it?" Trevor asked, sounding almost disappointed. "No fight? No pleading?" Frank looked up at his son. No, at the young man who'd helped plan his destruction. What would be the point? He signed the last document and stood. "I'll pack a bag and be gone within the hour." As he reached the door, Rita called out, "Frank, your pension checks will be direct deposited to the joint account until the divorce is finalized. We'll need that money to cover the house payments until we can sell." Frank paused, but didn't turn around. Of course. Chapter 3, The Departure. Frank's packing was efficient and deliberate. One military duffel bag containing clothes, his medals, a few personal items, and one particular file folder he'd been preparing for months. He moved through the house he'd paid for, past the furniture he'd bought, under the roof he'd provided, feeling like a ghost in his own life. Rita and Boyd were in the kitchen, sharing a bottle of champagne and speaking in hushed, excited tones about their plans. Trevor was on the couch, already looking through car magazines, planning how to sell Frank's restored 1967 Mustang. Madison was upstairs, probably planning her room renovation. None of them looked up as Frank walked out the front door for the last time. He drove to a hotel across town, checked in under a false name he'd established months ago, and opened his laptop. The real Frank Delacroix, the one who'd spent 25 years in psychological operations, was finally going to work. Rita thought she'd discovered his secret finances. In reality, she'd found exactly what he'd wanted her to find. Fake accounts, fabricated debts, false records he'd created specifically to support her narrative. She thought she was playing him, but she'd been playing into his hand from the moment she'd decided to betray him. Frank opened his encrypted files and began making phone calls. The first was to his lawyer, not the family attorney Rita knew about, but a specialist in criminal defense who'd been briefed on Frank's situation months ago. The second call was to a private investigator who'd been documenting every illegal transaction Rita and Boyd had made using Frank's forged signature. The third call was to a former military colleague who now worked in federal banking investigation. By the time Frank closed his laptop 2 hours later, several investigations were about to begin. Rita and Boyd had committed multiple federal crimes: identity theft, bank fraud, mortgage fraud, and forgery. They'd used Frank's military credentials to secure loans, forged his signature on documents, and created a paper trail that would destroy them both. But that was just the beginning. Frank's real plan was far more sophisticated than simple criminal prosecution. He'd spent 6 months creating a web of financial instruments, shell companies, and legal structures that would systematically dismantle everything Rita and Boyd thought they'd stolen. The house they believed they were taking? Frank had quietly restructured the mortgage through a company he controlled. They'd be making payments to him, unknowingly, while he collected evidence of their fraud. Boyd's assets? Frank had invested in the companies Boyd owed money to, gaining enough influence to call in debts at the worst possible moment. Rita's wellness center? Frank had discovered Boyd had been embezzling from it to fund their affair. When that information became public, along with evidence of the forged loans, both their personal and professional reputations would be destroyed. But Frank wasn't finished. He'd learned that Boyd had done this before, seduced wealthy women, manipulated them into financial fraud, then disappeared when the heat got too intense. There were 3 other victims in different states, women who'd lost their homes and savings to Boyd's schemes. Frank had contacted them all. They were very interested in testifying against Boyd and Rita as co-conspirators. As Frank lay on the hotel bed that night, he thought about the phone calls that would start coming soon. Rita would realize she'd walked into a trap. Boyd would discover his carefully constructed new identity was crumbling. Trevor and Madison would learn that their inheritance was funded by crimes they'd helped enable. But Frank Delacroix had learned something in 40 years of service. Patience was the most devastating weapon of all. Chapter 4. The First Tremor. 1 week after Frank's departure, the first cracks began to show. Rita stood in the kitchen of her newly acquired home, staring at a certified letter from Morrison & Associates, a law firm she'd never heard of. The letter was addressed to Frank, but since he'd signed power of attorney over to her, another document she believed she'd cleverly manipulated him into signing, she opened it. Dear Mr. Delacroix, our client, Pinnacle Financial Services, has requested immediate payment of the outstanding balance on account hashtag 4471-89X. Per the terms of your agreement dated March 15th, failure to maintain required payments triggers a full acceleration clause. The entire principal amount of $347,000 is now due within 30 days. Rita's hands shook. $347,000? She'd never heard of Pinnacle Financial Services, and March 15th was during the time she thought Frank was falling for her tricks. She called Boyd immediately. We have a problem. Boyd arrived within an hour, his usual confident swagger replaced by nervous energy. What kind of problem? Rita showed him the letter. Boyd's face went pale as he read. This doesn't make sense, he said. We traced all of Frank's accounts. There was no loan this big. Unless he was hiding more than we thought, Rita said, her voice rising. Maybe the gambling debts were real. Maybe. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed the number for Sunrise Bank, where they'd applied for the mortgage transfer on the house. Mrs. Delacroix, this is Janet Harrison from Sunrise Bank. We need to discuss some irregularities in your mortgage application. Rita's stomach dropped. What kind of irregularities? The documentation you provided appears to have been altered. We're going to need to verify all signatures with your husband present. Can you have him come in this week? Rita hung up and immediately dialed Frank's number. It went straight to voicemail. Meanwhile, across town, Trevor was experiencing his own crisis. He'd gone to the DMV to transfer ownership of Frank's Mustang, only to discover the car was registered to a company called Delacroix Holdings, not to Frank personally. The clerk informed him that he'd need corporate authorization to transfer the title. But it's my father's car, Trevor protested. According to our records, sir, this vehicle is corporate property. You'll need to contact the company's legal department. Trevor called the number provided, reaching an automated system that eventually connected him to a law office. The attorney who answered was polite but firm. I'm sorry, but Mr. Delacroix specifically instructed us that no family members are authorized to access corporate assets without his written permission. Where is my father? Trevor demanded. I'm not authorized to provide that information. Madison was facing her own problems. She'd attempted to use one of Frank's credit cards to buy new furniture, only to discover the account had been frozen. When she called the credit card company, they informed her that the account holder had reported potential fraud and requested a security hold on all transactions. By evening, the 3 conspirators were gathered in Rita's kitchen, each bringing their own piece of bad news. It's like he knew, Rita said, pacing. Like he planned this. Boyd shook his head. That's impossible. Frank's a simple soldier. He doesn't have the sophistication to set up something this complex. Then explain this. Rita slammed down another letter that had arrived that afternoon. It was from the IRS, requesting documentation for unreported income in Boyd's name. Income that appeared to be connected to Rita's business. Boyd stared at the letter. I never received unreported income from your business. I know that, and you know that, but someone's been reporting payments to you. Large payments. For the past 6 months. Trevor looked up from his phone. Guys, We have bigger problems. I just got a call from my bank. They're freezing my accounts, pending an investigation into suspicious deposits. What suspicious deposits? Rita asked. Apparently, someone's been depositing money into my account from offshore companies. Money I never received, but the paper trail says I did. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Frank hadn't just discovered their plan. He'd been building a counterplan. Every move they'd made, every document they'd forged, every lie they'd told, had been anticipated. Rita's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Check your email. She opened her laptop and found a message with no text, just a video attachment. When she clicked play, she saw herself and Boyd in his apartment, discussing their plans to frame Frank for gambling debts. The timestamp showed it was from 3 months ago. Another message arrived. This is just the beginning. Boyd stood up abruptly. I'm leaving town. Tonight. You can't leave, Rita said desperately. We're in this together. No, Boyd said, backing toward the door. You're in this. I was never married to him. I can disappear. But as Boyd reached for the door handle, his phone rang. The caller ID showed his mother's number from Arizona. Boyd, honey, are you in some kind of trouble? 2 men in suits came by asking about you. They said they were federal agents. Boyd's face went white. He looked at Rita, then at Trevor and Madison. He's not just coming for us, Boyd whispered. He's destroying everything we ever touched. Chapter 5. The Tightening Noose. Frank sat in his hotel room, monitoring multiple computer screens showing bank accounts, legal documents, and surveillance footage. 3 weeks had passed since he'd signed the papers, and his trap was working perfectly. Rita had made 7 desperate calls to his phone, each more frantic than the last. Boyd had attempted to flee the state, only to be stopped at the airport by federal agents investigating the fraudulent loans. Trevor and Madison had both received visits from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. But Frank's plan was far more intricate than they'd yet discovered. He'd spent 6 months creating a complex web of shell companies, all legally registered, all designed to ensnare Rita and Boyd in their own greed. Every forged signature they'd used, every false document they'd created, had been traced back to specific criminal acts that carried federal penalties. His phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he'd been expecting. Mr. Delacroix? This is Detective Sarah Chun with the city police. We have Rita Delacroix in custody. She's asking to speak with you. Frank smiled for the first time in weeks. What are the charges? Multiple counts of forgery, identity theft, and bank fraud. But we think there's more. She claims you set her up, but the evidence suggests she and her co-conspirator Boyd Hutchins orchestrated an elaborate fraud scheme using your identity. I'll be right there. The police station was familiar territory for Frank. He'd consulted with law enforcement agencies throughout his career, helping them understand criminal psychology and interrogation techniques. Now those skills were serving him personally. Rita sat in the interrogation room, looking haggard and desperate. When Frank entered with his attorney, her eyes blazed with fury. You bastard, she hissed. You planned this whole thing. Frank sat down calmly across from her. I signed the papers you gave me. I left quietly. What happens after that is simply the natural consequence of your choices. The loans you took out in my name, the shell companies, the fake accounts, you created all of that to frame me. Frank's attorney leaned forward. My client has never taken out unauthorized loans or created false accounts. The evidence shows that you and Mr. Hutchins forged his signature on multiple financial instruments. The companies you borrowed from are all legitimate businesses with proper legal standing. But the timing, Rita started. The timing of what? Frank asked. The timing of you deciding to commit fraud? The timing of you choosing to forge my signature? The timing of you planning to steal my assets through false documentation? Rita's face crumpled. Where are my children? What have you done to Trevor and Madison? They're adults, Frank said. They made their own choices. Trevor accepted money from offshore accounts to support your fraud. Madison helped create false financial records. They're facing their own legal consequences. They're your children. Frank's expression didn't change. No, my children wouldn't have betrayed me. My children wouldn't have helped you destroy me. The people calling themselves Trevor and Madison are strangers who happen to share my DNA. Rita began to cry, but Frank felt nothing. He'd buried his emotions for her months ago, when he'd first discovered her betrayal. "Frank, please," she whispered. "I made a mistake. I was scared about money, about the future. Boyd convinced me." "Stop." Frank's voice cut through her pleading. "You made a choice. You chose to betray me. You chose to involve our children in your betrayal. You chose to commit crimes using my identity. Every consequence you're facing is the direct result of those choices." He stood to leave, but Rita grabbed his arm. "What happens now?" Frank looked down at her hand on his arm, and she quickly released it. "Now you face federal charges for bank fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Boyd faces similar charges, plus charges in 3 other states for similar schemes he's run before. Trevor and Madison will likely face reduced charges if they cooperate with investigators." Rita's face went pale. "Other states? Did you really think you were Boyd's first victim? He's been running this same scheme for years, seducing wealthy women, manipulating them into financial fraud, then disappearing when things got complicated. You were just the latest mark." Frank turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Rita, the house you thought you were taking? The mortgage payments you've been making for the past 3 weeks? They've been going to one of my companies. Thank you for keeping up with the payments." As Frank left the police station, he felt the same calm satisfaction he'd experienced after successful military operations. Phase 1 was complete. Rita and Boyd were facing serious federal charges. Trevor and Madison were learning that actions have consequences. But Frank wasn't finished. There were still debts to be paid, and Frank Delacroix always collected what was owed to him. Chapter 6: The Reckoning Begins. The federal courthouse was a monument to justice, its marble columns and brass fixtures gleaming under the morning sun. Frank sat in the gallery, watching as Rita and Boyd were led in wearing orange jumpsuits, their hands shackled. 6 months had passed since his retirement ceremony. Rita had been denied bail after prosecutors argued she was a flight risk. Boyd had attempted to flee twice, once making it as far as Mexico before being extradited back. Trevor and Madison sat in the front row with their court-appointed attorneys, both having agreed to testify against their mother and Boyd in exchange for reduced sentences. They looked older, broken by the weight of their choices. Frank's attorney, Marcus Thornfield, leaned over and whispered, "The prosecutor says Rita wants to make a deal. She's willing to plead guilty to all charges if you'll speak on her behalf at sentencing." Frank's expression remained neutral. "No. She's claiming the affair was just a mistake, that Boyd manipulated her into the financial fraud. Irrelevant. Frank, she's looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Boyd's looking at even more." Frank turned to look at his attorney. "Marcus, I spent 25 years defending this country from people who betrayed it. I've never shown mercy to traitors, and I'm not starting now." The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Jennifer Walsh, called her first witness, Frank himself. As Frank took the stand, he looked directly at Rita. She mouthed the word, "please," but he might as well have been looking at a stranger. "Mr. Delacroix," Prosecutor Walsh began, "can you tell the court about your relationship with the defendants?" "Rita Delacroix was my wife for 22 years. Boyd Hutchins was her business partner and, as I later discovered, her lover. Trevor and Madison Delacroix are my biological children." "Can you describe how you discovered the fraud scheme?" Frank's testimony was methodical and devastating. He detailed how he'd uncovered the affair, the forged documents, the false financial records. He explained how Rita and Boyd had used his military credentials to secure loans, forged his signature on multiple documents, and involved his children in their conspiracy. "The defendants believed they were manipulating me," Frank said. "In reality, they were revealing their true character. I simply documented their crimes and allowed the legal system to take its course." Rita's attorney, a nervous young man clearly out of his depth, tried to cross-examine Frank. "Mr. Delacroix, isn't it true that you orchestrated this entire scenario to frame my client?" Frank's stare could have frozen fire. "Your client forged my signature on loan documents. Your client created false financial records. Your client committed identity theft. These are crimes she chose to commit. I simply ensured there was evidence of her choices." But you set up the shell companies. I set up legitimate businesses through proper legal channels. The fact that your client chose to defraud those businesses doesn't make me responsible for her crimes. When Boyd's attorney tried a similar approach, Frank's response was even more devastating. Mr. Hutchins has committed similar fraud in Nevada, California, and Arizona, targeting wealthy women and manipulating them into financial crimes. He saw my wife as another mark. The fact that she willingly participated doesn't make her a victim. It makes her a co-conspirator. After 3 days of testimony, the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. On the count of conspiracy to commit bank fraud, we find the defendant Rita Delacroix guilty. On the count of identity theft, we find the defendant Rita Delacroix guilty. On the count of forgery, we find the defendant Rita Delacroix guilty. The pattern repeated for all charges against both Rita and Boyd. Trevor and Madison received suspended sentences and probation in exchange for their cooperation, but they were now convicted felons. At sentencing, Rita was given 18 years in federal prison. Boyd received 25 years, with additional time for his previous crimes in other states. As the bailiffs led them away, Rita looked back at Frank one last time. Her expression was pleading, desperate, seeking some sign of the man she'd once manipulated. Frank's face remained expressionless. As far as he was concerned, Rita Delacroix had died the day she betrayed him. The woman being led away in shackles was just a criminal paying for her crimes. Chapter 7. Settling all accounts. 2 years after the trial, Frank stood in the conference room of his private security firm, Delacroix Strategic Solutions. The company had grown rapidly, built on Frank's reputation and the contacts he'd made during his military career. His assistant, Lucy, knocked and entered. "Mr. Delacroix, Trevor is here to see you." Frank didn't look up from his files. "I'm not available." "Sir," he says it's about his mother. "She's been hospitalized." Frank finally looked up. "Send him in. 5 minutes." Trevor entered looking haggard and desperate. Prison had been hard on Rita, and the stress was showing on their son as well. "Dad, please," Trevor began. "Mom's had a heart attack. The doctors say the stress of prison is killing her. She needs medical care that the prison can't provide." Frank gestured to a chair, but remained standing. "Sit." Trevor sat, looking more like a supplicant than a son. "Dad, I know what we did was wrong. I know we hurt you, but she's dying, and—" Trevor's face crumpled. "Please, Dad, I'm begging you. Use your influence. Get her transferred to a medical facility. Help her." Frank walked to the window overlooking the city. His company occupied the top 3 floors of a downtown high-rise, a symbol of how far he'd risen since his retirement. "Trevor, you made your choice 2 years ago. You chose to help your mother destroy me. You chose to accept money from fraudulent accounts. You chose to laugh at my expense. Those choices have consequences. But she's your wife." "No." Frank turned around, his voice cold as Arctic wind. "She was my wife. The woman in prison is a convicted felon who committed crimes against me. You want me to show mercy to someone who showed me none?" Trevor stood up, anger flashing in his eyes. What happened to forgiveness? What happened to family? Frank walked over to his desk and picked up a photograph. It was from his retirement ceremony, showing Rita, Trevor, and Madison smiling as they presented him with a gift they'd given him knowing they were about to destroy his life. "Family doesn't betray family," Frank said quietly. "Family doesn't laugh at family's destruction. Family doesn't commit crimes against family. The people in this photograph were never my family. They were actors playing roles, waiting for the right moment to strike." He set the photograph down. "Your mother chose her path. You chose yours. Now live with the consequences." Trevor's desperation turned to rage. "You're a monster. She loved you." Frank's expression didn't change. "She loved my money. She loved my status. She loved the life I provided. She never loved me. If she had, she wouldn't have betrayed me." "Fine," Trevor said, standing. "But what about Madison? She's struggling, Dad. She can't find work with a felony record. She's living in a studio apartment, working minimum wage jobs. She was just a kid when this happened." Frank walked back to his desk and sat down. Madison was 19 years old. an adult capable of making adult decisions. She chose to help you and your mother commit crimes. She chose to laugh at my destruction. She chose to help plan my financial ruin. He opened a file on his desk. According to my investigators, Madison is currently working 3 jobs to pay rent on a studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood. She's applied to 47 companies in the past 6 months and been rejected by all of them due to her criminal record. Trevor looked shocked. You've been monitoring her? I monitor all threats to my security. That includes people who have committed crimes against me, regardless of their DNA. Frank closed the file. Your 5 minutes are up. Trevor didn't move. Dad, please. I'm asking you to be human. Frank stood and walked to the door, opening it. I'm being human. I'm being the kind of human who doesn't forgive betrayal. I'm being the kind of human who holds traitors accountable for their actions. I'm being the kind of human who learned that mercy is weakness when dealing with people who would destroy you. As Trevor walked to the door, Frank spoke one final time. Trevor, you want forgiveness? You want mercy? You should have thought about that before you chose to betray me. Actions have consequences. You're living with yours now. After Trevor left, Frank returned to his desk. He'd built a new life from the ashes of his old one, and it was better than anything he'd had before. His company was thriving. His reputation was sterling. He was wealthy, powerful, and free from the people who'd tried to destroy him. Rita was dying in prison. Boyd was serving his sentence in maximum security. Trevor and Madison were struggling with the consequences of their choices. Frank felt no satisfaction in their suffering, but he felt no sympathy either. They made their choices. Now they were living with the results. Chapter 8. The Last Visit. The federal prison was a fortress of concrete and steel, surrounded by razor wire and guard towers. Frank had been here before, consulting on security matters for the government. He'd never imagined he'd be visiting as someone's husband. Rita lay in the prison hospital, connected to monitors and 4 lines. She looked 20 years older than her actual age, her hair gray and thin, her face gaunt. Prison had not been kind to her. She looked up as Frank entered, her eyes filling with tears. Frank, she whispered. You came. Frank pulled up a chair, but didn't sit close to the bed. The warden called. He said you were dying. Rita tried to smile. I guess I am. The doctors say my heart is failing. Too much stress, they say. Frank said nothing. Frank, I need to tell you something. About Boyd. About everything. I know everything I need to know. Rita shook her head weakly. No, you don't. Boyd, he showed me pictures. Pictures of you with other women during your deployments. He said you've been cheating on me for years. He said you never loved me, that I was just convenient. Frank's expression didn't change. There were no other women. I know that now. Rita said, tears streaming down her face. I know the pictures were fake. I know Boyd manipulated me. But at the time, I believed him. I thought you'd been lying to me our entire marriage. Frank stood up. It doesn't matter. It does matter. Rita's voice gained strength. I loved you, Frank. I really did love you. I was just scared. Scared that you'd leave me. Scared that I'd wasted my life on someone who didn't care about me. Frank walked to the window, looking out at the prison yard where inmates were exercising. Rita, even if Boyd showed you fake pictures, even if you believed I was cheating, that doesn't justify fraud. That doesn't justify forging my signature on loan documents. That doesn't justify involving our children in a scheme to destroy me. I know, Rita whispered. I know it was wrong. I know I hurt you in ways I can never fix. Frank turned back to face her. You didn't just hurt me, Rita. You betrayed me. You took our children, our own children, and turned them into accomplices in your crime. You made them laugh at my pain. You made them participants in my destruction. Rita closed her eyes. I was angry. I was hurt. I wanted to hurt you back. And you succeeded. Frank walked back to the chair, but didn't sit down. Rita, you want absolution. You want me to forgive you, so you can die in peace. But I'm not a priest, and this isn't a confessional. You made choices. Those choices destroyed our family, destroyed our children's futures, and nearly destroyed me. Frank, please. You want to know what hurts the most? Frank's voice was quiet but sharp as a blade. It's not the affair. It's not even the fraud. It's that you made our children into monsters. Trevor and Madison were good kids before you poisoned them against me. You turned them into criminals. You destroyed their lives along with yours. Rita was sobbing now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Frank stood by her bedside, looking down at the woman who'd shared his life for 22 years, the woman who'd given him 2 children, the woman who'd betrayed him more completely than any enemy he'd ever faced. Rita, I'm not here to forgive you. I'm not here to offer comfort. I'm here to tell you something important. She looked up at him hopefully. Your choices have consequences. Trevor is working night shifts in a warehouse, struggling to pay rent. Madison is cleaning offices at night because no one will hire a convicted felon during the day. They're both broken people, struggling with addiction and depression. Rita's face went pale. Addiction. Trevor's been arrested twice for possession. Madison's been in rehab 3 times. Your choices didn't just destroy you, they destroyed them too. Frank turned to leave. Frank, wait, Rita called out desperately. What about Mercy? What about the man I married? The man who believed in second chances? Frank paused at the door. That man died the day his wife and children served him divorce papers at his retirement ceremony. The man you're talking to now is someone different, someone harder, someone who learned that mercy is a luxury he can't afford. He opened the door, then looked back one final time. Goodbye, Rita. As Frank walked down the prison corridor, he heard her calling his name, but he didn't turn back. He'd said what he came to say. There was nothing left between them now but the consequences of her choices. Chapter 9. The Final Victory. Frank stood in his office 5 years after his retirement ceremony, looking out at the city sprawling below him. Delacroix Strategic Solutions now occupied an entire building, employing over 200 people and generating tens of millions in revenue annually. His assistant knocked and entered. Mr. Delacroix, there's been a development. Frank turned from the window. What kind of development? Rita Delacroix died last night. Heart failure. The prison warden called this morning. Frank nodded once. Thank you for letting me know. His assistant hesitated. Sir, there's more. Boyd Hutchins was found dead in his cell this morning. Apparent suicide. Frank felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sadness, no sense of closure. Rita and Boyd were simply problems that had solved themselves. Also, his assistant continued, Trevor and Madison have both requested meetings with you. Separately, Frank walked to his desk and sat down. Schedule them for tomorrow. 15 minutes each. The next day, Madison entered his office first. She looked tired, worn down by years of struggling with the consequences of her choices. But there was something different about her, a kind of resigned maturity that hadn't been there before. Dad, she said quietly, sitting across from his desk. Madison, I heard about Mom. I wanted to thank you. Frank raised an eyebrow. Thank me? Madison nodded. For not helping her. For not showing mercy. For letting us face the consequences of what we did. Frank said nothing, waiting. I've been going to therapy, Madison continued. Real therapy, not court-ordered. I've been trying to understand how I became the kind of person who could laugh at their father's pain. How I could participate in destroying you. She took a deep breath. The therapist says I was never really your daughter. I was Mom's puppet. I did what she wanted because it was easier than thinking for myself. But that's not an excuse. I made choices. Bad choices. Frank's expression remained neutral. Yes, you did. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Madison said. I'm not asking for help. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand that you're not my father anymore, and I'm not your daughter. We're just 2 people who used to know each other. She stood up. I also wanted you to know that I'm doing okay. Not great, but okay. I'm clean. I have a job. I have a small apartment. I'm paying my own way for the first time in my life. Frank looked at her for a long moment. Good. Madison walked to the door, then paused. Dad? Frank? I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. For building all this. For not letting us destroy you. For being stronger than we were. After Madison left, Trevor entered. He looked worse than his sister. Older, harder, with the look of a man who'd lost too many battles. She's dead, Trevor said without preamble. I know. Trevor sat down heavily. I hated you for a long time. Blamed you for everything. Blamed you for Mom's death, for Madison's problems, for my own failures. Frank waited. But I've had time to think. 5 years of thinking. And I realized something. Trevor looked up at Frank. You didn't destroy us. We destroyed ourselves. We made the choice to betray you. We made the choice to laugh at your pain. We made the choice to help Mom commit crimes. Trevor's voice cracked slightly. I've been jealous of you, you know that? Jealous that you survived what we did to you. Jealous that you built something better. Jealous that you moved on while we're still trapped by what we did. Frank's expression didn't change. Jealousy is a choice too. Trevor laughed bitterly. Yeah, it is. Just like everything else. He stood up. I'm not asking for anything, Frank. I'm not asking for forgiveness or help or a second chance. I'm just here to tell you that you won. Completely. Absolutely. Trevor walked toward the door, then turned back. You want to know the worst part? The part that really destroys me? It's not that we lost. It's that we deserved to lose. We deserved everything that happened to us. As Trevor left, Frank returned to his window. The city stretched out below him, full of possibilities and opportunities. He'd built a new life from nothing, surrounded himself with loyal employees and trusted associates. He was wealthy, successful, and free. Rita was dead. Boyd was dead. Trevor and Madison were broken remnants of their former selves, struggling to survive in a world that had no place for them. Frank had won, but victory tasted like ash. Not because he regretted his actions. He didn't. Not because he felt guilty. He felt nothing. Victory tasted like ash because winning had required becoming someone he'd never wanted to be. Someone who could look at his dying wife and feel nothing. Someone who could watch his children suffer and feel no compassion. But that was the price of betrayal. Rita and his children had forced him to become this person. They'd killed the man who might have shown mercy, who might have forgiven, who might have offered second chances. Frank Delacroix had learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes survival requires becoming a monster. Sometimes winning means losing everything that made you human. As the sun set over the city, Frank stood alone in his office, surrounded by the empire he'd built from the ashes of his destroyed life.